Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Behind the Human. I'm your host, Mark Champagne. It's my job to unpack the stories and mental fitness practices of people living at the top of their game, personally and professionally. We've got a just stunning human coming onto the show today, which I'm excited to jump into conversation with. We've got Dr. Joel Warsh, also known as Dr. Gator. I mean, how cool is that? And he's a board-certified pediatrician in Los Angeles, specializing in parenting, wellness, and integrative medicine. Originally from Toronto, he earned his degrees in kinesiology, psychology, and epidemiology before completing his medical degree at Thomas Jefferson Medical College and his pediatric training at CHLA. He founded Integrative Pediatrics in Medicine Studio City in 2018, and he is a published researcher, media contributor, and founder of the Parenting Masterclass Platform, Raising Amazing. Love it. Welcome to the show, brother. We're nearly at 400 people at this point. We start the show in the same way, and that's just to actually cut out all of the titles and just start with the person. So the question is, who are you?
I think that I'm just a regular dude, but I'm trying to, at least over the last few years, I've really come to understand that there's a lot more to health than what I had learned through my medical training. And so I'm really just trying to share that wisdom. I did all the regular medical training, CHLA, Children's Hospital Los Angeles. It's very Western allopathic program, really good program. But I got frustrated, with the regular system and medications for everything, and seeing patients, family members go outside the medical system and then get better. And that really made no sense to me. And I met my now wife, who was very holistic minded as well. And those two things together really pushed me to start learning about this. And I'm not against Western medicine. I think there's a lot of great stuff that we do, but I think there's a lot more balance that we can have. And so that's what led me to start opening up. Or that's what led me to open up my practice. And very surprisingly, I guess to me, or maybe not so surprising now, but people are really interested in integrative medicine. I did not know that at the time as much.
Yeah.
And I've never really advertised, it's never really been an issue. And lots of really cool people come to my office. And that led me to start doing social media, which I think was something that I was pretty against. I still don't love social media all that much, but I think it's a good avenue if you use it well. And that has grown really quickly. So that's been exciting. And then I also realize now that, with social media, you can only tell things in small snippets. So that's what led me to write a book. And that's what I've been working on lately, Parenting at Your Child's Pace. That's coming out or is out, depending on, I guess, when you're listening to this. And that's been exciting. So that's where I'm at right now.
Love it. But what would you say? There's a lot of things you're working on, of course, but what are the fundamental, like if I were to ask your wife to describe, who is Joel, like at the core of the human, like what would she tell me?
Yeah, I think she would say that fun, open-minded, curious, and really someone who is just into health and wellness. And as a parent, especially now as a dad of two children, really starting to see the world in a little bit different way and understanding that I really want to see my kids grow up healthy and happy. And I have more and more concern about the direction that we're going in terms of our health. And that's where I'm trying to spread my message and spread what I have learned over the years. So I think curious and open-minded are really, really good, kind of broad terms in terms of for me, because I think that's what does make me a little bit different than a lot of doctors, is being open-minded and not really so hardcore on the medicine stuff. I'm not against it, again, as I said, but I think there's a lot more to it. And if we're not open-minded, we're going to continue down this path, which is not great, I think.
Yeah. Well, I feel like as soon as we lose our curiosity, which is always, especially given the topics that you speak about, as we know, kids are the most curious humans on the planet. You see it all the time with the questions we get as parents. And I know I'm kind of taken back often with, like, you know what, buddy, I don't know the answer to that. That's a really good question, right? And you start to think about, where am I losing my curiosity, or where is it being kind of pulled out of me just from general society? I think as we get older and older and you get into the system of things and whatnot, you start to lose that. And as soon as we stop asking questions, that's a scary place. And I think we've all kind of witnessed that over the last few years.
Yeah. And I was going to say, just to add, and not just not asking questions, but not being allowed to. I think that's become a big issue is really this frustration around there's one right way, or, do it this way and not ask questions, or my way, or get out of my office. Like, that's where I feel like medicine is going and healthcare is going, which is really the wrong direction. I mean, science at its core is asking questions, questioning everything, never really assuming that whatever you know is what you know and is 100% correct, and then just continually trying to educate yourself. And it seems these days, especially with social media, that it's a lot more fighting, a lot more division, and a lot of censorship as opposed to discussion and debate, which I think is more important in the way that we're going to get to a better place.
Yeah. So for the parents listening, and even, let's just include, future parents, and I mean, frankly, probably people in between as well. Like, why should, in your opinion, why should they pay attention to this conversation? Like, what are we going to get out of this chat?
I think they should pay attention to this conversation. One, if you're interested in hearing the way that I or pediatricians think about a lot of questions, and certainly thinking about things in an integrative perspective, I think that's really important, because we really have been taught to kind of follow along and listen to doctors. And I think, obviously doctors are good people in general, right? But there's this new world that is kind of evolving, and the world is moving a lot faster than medicine moves. And I think it's really important to understand that there's a lot of stresses out there. We want to de-stress a little bit. There are ways to think through all the questions that we're confronted, or most of the questions that we're confronted, by synthesizing information. And I also think it's important to have discussions on all topics, including controversial topics. And I think that we need to open those conversations back up to help people and to help families and parents not feel like they're alone, especially if you're an integrative minded, health conscious parent. Sometimes it can really feel like you're alone. Like, I mentioned that already, before we started chatting. And I feel the same way. That's why I try to build community. That's why I try to talk about things, because the reality is that there's a lot more people that think this way. And every day there are more and more people thinking this way. And there's no reason not to think that way. There's no no sides, right? There's no Western medicine, alternative medicine. There's no sides. We all want healthy kids. We don't always agree on how to get there, or healthy, adults. But at the end of the day, it's discussions about how do we do what's best for ourselves and our family. And I think that sometimes we feel like we can't talk about these things, which we should be able to.
I agree. I mean, what comes to mind immediately, and this is very much kind of live in my world and with my wife and our two kids, or at least our 8-year-old who's in school, just feeling like, people are doing their best. I think you're setting, well, you didn't say that. I think, I think people are trying, and they're not trying to be malicious for the most part. But we have systems that are set up to kind of fail us in a way. And what's been coming up on our side personally, and I think will resonate with really anyone listening, is just, screens and screen time in schools and so forth. And my wife's on one of the parenting committees here locally, and they started to ask questions like, has anyone just kind of zoomed out to see how much screen time is actually taking place in the school, with whether that's computers or there's YouTube that's coming up as well. And I mean, everyone's a little bit different, but we try to limit that stuff and as much as possible, especially at a young age. But then you send your kids to school, and there's a lot of it happening. Like, there's screen time, there's the snacks and the food that are like food-like substances, let's just say, in many cases. So, I pulled one of your. And I encourage everyone that's listening to take a look at your Instagram account, because there's some beautiful quotes and I would say perspective shifts on whiteboards that you often share. And one of them that I pulled reads this, and it says, "There is no app to replace a parent's lap. Read to your kids. Let's talk about screens," essentially is what I put in brackets afterwards. So I feel like we're just default. You see it everywhere, not just school and restaurants. It's like seems like the easy thing to do. But this, I mean, unless you're like buried in the sand, I mean, it's pretty clear there's a lot of challenge and consequences to the amount of screen time for kids at this point. What's your take on that topic, and how do we start having a different conversation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely agree. I think that one of the good things for sure this year is that screens has become a much more talked about discussion. I mean, especially with Jonathan Haidt's book, it's really kind of out there now, and we are seeing a little bit of pushback and a lot more discussion. So I think that is great, because it's really absurd where we've gotten to in terms of screen time. I think that it's very important for parents to understand, at least from my opinion, that screens are not going to turn your child's brain to mush. If they're looking at a screen for a couple minutes, is that the end of the world? No, I don't think so. Can you learn from a screen? Absolutely, you can. There's a ton of research to show that you can learn from screens. What is important to understand about the research is that if you look at it, it says, yes, you can learn, but you learn better from somebody, right? You learn better from interaction. Yeah. And so, if you need to do something for 5 minutes, if you're on a plane, fine. That's not the end of the world. That's not really what I'm worried about as a dad or a pediatrician. I think there are pluses and minuses to everything. But where we are is older kids are on screen 7 to 9 hours a day on average. So the question is, what are they not doing if they are on a screen for that length of time? If you're doing your homework on a screen, is that the end of the world? No, I don't think so. But if you're spending 9 hours of the day on a screen, you're not getting outside. You're not socializing with people in real life. You're not cooking. You're not exercising. There's so many things that you're not doing. So what are you not doing? That to me is the big concern. And we have to start to push back to moving away from defaulting to being on a screen all day, to defaulting to having our heads down and scrolling and being on social media, especially with social media, because the apps, I think, are the biggest issue is what we're doing on the screens and how much stress that brings to us, how addicted we are to it. You can be on social media and your feed could be puppies and inspirational quotes and funny videos, and that can be great for your mental health, but that's not where we move to. That's what it used to be, I think, right? I think that's what I remember it being 5-10 years ago. But now it's like everything seems like it's scary, fear-driven, division, fighting. And so we have to recognize that it's destroying the mental health of everyone, but certainly the children. And it's I wouldn't say simple, but it's a very practical thing that we can make some changes on and kind of scale back a little bit to put some boundaries there to help with our mental health. And especially when it comes to schools, to allow kids to focus in school. There is no need for them to be on a screen and on social media when you're in the middle of class. It's just a distraction, an easy distraction. So we can get rid of those. And a lot of places are starting to do that. And safety, of course, always comes up. And, I say to that, well, first of all, there's very few instances where a phone is going to do anything for safety in that kind of sense. I mean, there's usually phones around if some emergency comes up that you could call the police or whatever it would be, or a fire. And you can certainly have a flip phone. You can have a phone with just dialing capabilities. So that way, if there's an emergency, you can call. But it doesn't mean you need to be on Instagram during class. So I think there are ways to kind of balance it a little bit. I think we're way out of balance. So yeah, I think it is a big problem. One of the bigger problems is facing our children. But I also try to help de-stress parents. Is not, if your 1-year-old sees you watching something for 3 minutes, it's not turning their brain to mush. I'm not worried about that.
Yeah. No, I understand that. But how much, I guess, what's the role of us as adults in this? Because, I mean, you can go to any public place and it's kind of sad, right? When you look up and see how essentially almost everyone is buried in their phone or their screen. Like we've completely reduced or eliminated, I guess, what you would have called boredom at one point, which I think is really important for the health of our minds and to let our minds breathe and think and so forth. Then when you think of kids, I mean, that's when they explore and try different things, right? And I feel like we're setting up the environment for that exploration just not to be there anymore.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard when it comes to adults because it's hard to decide for people what they should or should not do. As an adult, I think that is a sticky area that we're going to have to decide as either individuals or families how much we want to use technology. And it's not going anywhere. So it's probably not overly practical to be like, oh, all adults should only be on their screens for this long. But I think it is more practical to work on some of the apps and maybe some boundaries and guidelines around them and some barriers. Some other countries, you can only be on for a certain amount of hours, or you can only scroll for so long. So there are things that we can do to minimize the addiction a little bit. But when it comes to children, we put boundaries on many things. So if we deem that it is damaging to them, we have the evidence at this point to fairly conclusively decide that it's really affecting their mental health, then we can put some boundaries on it, just like we do with a lot of other things, alcohol, drugs, driving. We can minimize the usage for a certain amount of time, so that way we can give their brains more time to develop, more time away from the screens, if that's what we choose to value. And I think that's a value decision that's maybe more broad-based, right? I think every family is going to be different. You can make your own family decisions, but if we want to ban cell phones in schools or avoid children being on social media till a certain age, then it's something we have to do as a community, and something we're going to have to decide or vote on or whatever it's going to be, because it's really hard to be a parent with let's say a 14-year-old who every other child is on it and your child is not. And you're like, you don't need to be on Instagram. Why? What do you mean? And they're like, well, all my friends are, and now I'm left out. So it has to be a group. Has to be a group to really make it work, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, because I think that notion could be applied in many different cases. I see this with food as well, when it comes to the snacks that we send our kids to school with, and like, well, the one kid has, fruit roll-ups or Dunkaroos or something like that. And like I have, my son has carrots, and I mean, he loves that, but it's, like you said, the kids they're like, why do they have this? And then this looks really good. And see, it's obviously full of sugar and, addictive in that sense. So like for you and your wife, and just for the people that you work with, where do we start, I guess, Joel? Like what's some just good starting questions that we can at least get the ball rolling?
Yeah, it depends how old your child is, right? Because it's a much easier answer if your child is young, I would say, right? Like my kids are I have a baby and then a 4.5-year-old. So for me, I think the answer is easier if I'm committed to it, because the answer is you just don't expose them to it for that time, right? Because they're not around other kids so much. They're not getting other food. And so they eat what you choose. And so at that age, I think what is important, and if we're kind of starting from the beginning, it's teaching kids about healthy eating, providing them healthy food, and then explaining to them over time why we do and do not eat certain things. And then not never letting them eat a piece of cake, but just minimizing it. And if we are going to go to a party or something like okay, this has got a lot of sugar in it. It's not really that great for you. It's going to make you feel not so great. So we can have a couple bites, or we can have one piece, but we eat this as a special treat. And I think if you teach them that over time, then that at least fosters that understanding, which to me is the most important aspect to when they go to school. How are you going to stop them from eating the fruit roll-ups that their friends have? They have to have an understanding of it. But we also need to be realistic. They're probably going to try them, right? They're probably going to be curious about it, and they might eat them sometimes. But to me, at least, if you've taught them and they don't eat that stuff most of the time, then even if they do have a bite of it, or, they trade their snack or whatever every now and again, it's not going to be the end of the world. Most kids can handle some. It's just the amount that we are exposing to that's a problem. So I think that to me is the way to go, is just teaching them from day one. If you are wanting to change your habits at this point with your family, like you haven't done this before and now you want to start moving that direction, then I think it just has to be something the whole family does. I mean, you explain it to them, you talk about it, you have to model it. If you're modeling it and you're saying, well, we used to buy these things, but I've really come to understand that it's not very healthy for us, and it's making me feel not good, and it's giving you these symptoms. So we're going to try to buy different things, and we're going to try to eat some of these things, and we're not going to do this anymore. Explain to them. They're not, they're smart, right? So they can get it, and they may not be happy about it, but that'll go away in a couple of weeks anyways. And I think that is totally fine to do. If you prioritize it, then that just is what it is. And sometimes you got to be a parent, and they may not be the happiest with you, but that's okay. You take your power and you say, I'm the parent, and this is how we're going to eat. And I know that we have eaten like this, but we're going to make some changes. And you don't have to change everything. You don't have to go through your closets and throw all your food out, but you just start to buy different things slowly and start to teach them and include them, bring them with you. If they're frustrated, and say, all right, well, let's look at the label. Let's read this. Let's look at how much sugar's on there. Do you understand why red dye number, whatever, is not good for you? Okay, let's learn about that. Just teach them.
Yeah. I like that approach, because then it feels very inclusive as a family. And if, like you said, people are learning, and it's not just the, probably a little bit more old school style of you can't have this, right? And it's just listen because I'm the parent kind of thing. Like that. That doesn't always work, obviously. A nice, flowing, normal human conversation, even though they may be young, I think can go a long way.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a good solution for this problem in any way, because we don't want to stop them from eating things. We want to teach them how to select food, right? We want to teach them why, right? And if you don't teach them why, if you just say, no, you can't have a piece of cake ever, that doesn't teach them anything. Yeah. Right? I think it's so important to teach them over time, because our goal is to change our habits. And again, eating one piece of cake is not the problem. It's eating this food over and over and over again. It builds up over time. The chemicals build up, the additives add up, the preservatives add up, and eventually our bodies just cannot handle all the chemicals. And so we get sick and we get a chronic disease. I mean, 50% of kids have a chronic disease or something around that number, which is crazy. And it gets expressed in different ways in different people. But at the end of the day, if we don't get the nutrients that we need for our body and we get too many chemicals, well, what do we expect to happen?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like a lot of this stuff is, if you really take a pause and think about it, it's just common sense, right? In a way, but somehow we've like adjusted our new normal in some capacity and just don't think about this and think that, like, I'm looking at one of the screenshots I took from your Instagram. We look at autism being up 9,000% and be like, well, that's, like, that's just what it is right now. Or ADHD, 200%, mental health disorders, 71%. I mean, I go into a lot of schools with mental fitness and it's scary, very scary. The stress that's there. Eczema, 100% increase. Diabetes type 2, I like how you said this, increase too big to count, virtually non-existent in kids in the 1970s. It's wild. It's wild. So how do you, it feels heavy also, because it feels like we're so far down a path. And then again, I mean, of course, I don't want to paint or have a general brush and paint everyone in the same kind of camp, because there's a lot of really great people out there, doing great work. But it still feels like the system at large is kind of against everything that we're talking about in some capacity. So, like, how do you handle that as well for your own mental health and your own mental fitness? Like, what keeps you going, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I mean, the system is no doubt against our health. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's like nefariously against our health. Maybe in some ways it is, but that's not really the way that I like to think about it. I just think that businesses are set up to make money, not to provide health, right? Their CEO is literally there to make sure that they make more money this quarter than last quarter. That is a business's job and a corporation's job. And you cannot fault them for doing that. They're not here to make you healthy. They're here to make money. So we have to push back as a society. That's a very difficult thing to do, because corporations have gotten so big that there's really nobody policing them anymore, or very minimally policing them. So that, to me, is where, when I talk about what I speak about on my social media or in my book, it's about what you can do for your family, because that's where we are right now. Yes, it'd be nice if everybody wants to go, fight and be a part of advocacy and go to, parliament or whatever, then that's great. But that's not really realistic of what most people are going to do. So you got to focus on what you actually can do for your family. And that's what I focus on for my family, because for the most part, if you do the basic things, then you're still going to be healthy like people were 20, 30 years ago. We didn't see these rates of chronic disease like we see now. So it's not like you need to move to the mountains. I mean, people do. They can move to the middle of nowhere and that can be great, but that's not realistic for most people. So, okay, what do we do in our city right now that can make a big difference? And like you said, it's not rocket science. I start the book with that. I start by talking about the Dr. Gator smoothie. It's kind of a play on smoothies, right? It's not a real one. It's a metaphorical one, because, you watch all the daytime talk shows and they're like, the guru, air quotes, goes on there and they're like, we have my magical smoothie and it'll cure everything, right? So celery, carrots, whatever, which there's no such thing, right? It's not that complicated. The basic things that you need to do, I start with a big scoop of the seeds, what I call it being stress, environment and toxins, exercise, diet, and sleep. Throw in, getting outside, vitamin D, nature, going for walks, family time, love, community. Like, these are not complicated concepts, not really, right? I mean, there's complication to everything, but it's
well, they're ancestral though. That's right.
The basic things. Like, if you don't get the nutrients that you need and you get too many toxins, you're not going to be healthy. If we don't think about that, if we all want to say we're so busy, things cost so much, and they do. We're busy, and some things can cost more, but our health is suffering. We lose something for convenience. We lose something for mass production, and that is our health. And we have to recognize that that's just where we are. It just is the situation. And that doesn't, again, mean you have to change everything in your life. But if we are not mindful, if we live the same way that everybody else is living in North America, then 1 out of 2 kids have a chronic disease, more than that in adults. If you're okay with those odds, don't do anything different. But if you are not, then you have to take it upon yourself and your family to say, okay, what am I going to do differently? What am I going to be more mindful of? And where can I make small changes? That's it. It's not doom and gloom. It's not that everyone's going to be sick. It's just that here is where we are, and we have to recognize it. It's not genetics, it's environment. It's not genetics, it's our lifestyle. There are genetic factors that affect everybody. Of course they are, but you have to make choices, and those choices will affect your body and your family. And so we have a lot of control and power over these things, but it seems like we're talking more and more, or the media is talking more and more about genetics, and this is just kind of the way that it is, and this is the way that it's normal. And it's not normal. This wasn't normal like 20 years ago. It doesn't just happen. Like we're doing this. Our environment is doing this. So that means we have the power to change it. And you can't change everything. Like, you're not going to change the air that you breathe, but you can change the air in your home. You can get filters or plants. There are things you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that makes it at least, even just hearing you respond to that question, it lightens the situation a little bit, right? Because if you look at everything that we're speaking about, it can feel like a lot. And there's school system, there's health in general, and you can look at your air, your water, your food, like all of it, right? And you're like, my gosh, like it's just never ending. We're just surrounded by chemicals everywhere. But to your point, we can just focus on the things that we can control in our little micro environments, then like we can make small steps forward. And you start to see, I mean, I've been through my own personal health journeys. It's quite amazing how fast you see the results of those little micro shifts or those choices, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, no question about it. Not everything is a magical change in 3 days. And oftentimes, if you're going to change your lifestyle, it's a slow process. You start to feel better. You start to see some improvement, but it's not a quick fix. I mean, that's the difference, right? Medicine, society has moved towards this quick fix. Like, here's your symptom, here's your pill. Okay, you feel better, but that often doesn't get to the root of the problem. And oftentimes, I think a lot of our modern day chronic disease is the way that we're living. It's related to that, and the things that we're doing, and all the stuff that we talked about. And so to see the changes, it's not going to be immediate. I mean, maybe you'll feel a little better pretty quickly if you change some things, but it's a slow process. If you've been eating shitty food for 10 years, then you're going to change your diet today and it's going to be better. No, it's going to take you a few years to start feeling better, to build up the nutrients in your body, to rebuild your immune system appropriately. All these things matter. So it's not a quick fix. It's a real fix. It's a real, lifestyle sustainable thing. It's not a diet. It's not, I'm going to go on this eat these things. No, you're going to eat real food. You're going to eat healthy. You're going to move more. I mean, I think it's really funny if you watch like the blue zones, you watch like the videos on them or whatever, and you look at the people who are living the longest in the world, and there's always shots of the grandma who's in the kitchen, and she's like 95 years old or 102 years old and have huge muscles and like roll in and work it all day and there. And it's like, she's not working out at the gym. She's just, she loves cooking, and that's her exercise all day. She's moving. I mean, it's just your life. You don't need to go to the gym. I mean, you can, but it's like we have to move, and we've changed our lifestyle away from what actually works for humans. And that's why our life expectancy is going down. I mean, not everything we're doing is worse, right? Like we used to live till 40. So modern medicine and sanitation, all these things, well, yeah, it's good. We live till 70, 80, 90. Those are good things. But now life expectancy is going back down and chronic disease is going up. So that means that, okay, there's some good stuff we've done. We don't throw that away, but not everything that we're doing is working perfectly for our health. So let's come back in balance. Let's look at what we were doing 20 years ago. Maybe some of those things or some principles we need to bring back, and let's find a happy medium somewhere so that the life expectancy can go back up. We can be healthier. We can decrease our disease burden, and we're not doing that right now.
A lot of what we're talking about, the topic that kind of keeps coming up into my mind, and of course I'm biased because the work that I do is in mental fitness, but what keeps coming up for me is the more mentally fit we can be as kids, as parents, as humans in general, the more we'll ask, these kind of questions and have the clarity to be, well, wait a second, maybe can make a bit of a change or a choice, a different choice and so forth. So I'd love to just know, from your perspective, like, how would you define a mentally fit person? Like, what would that person look and feel like to you?
Well, I think that would be somebody who is confident in themselves, confident in their decisions, who is, I think it's just a simple answer. Like, they're happy. They're going about their day. They're content. They are doing the things that they want to be doing and living the life that they want to be living, whatever that may be, whether it's family or friendships or community, or whatever it is. I think to be mentally fit is one, as an integrative doctor, to step back and to say that like mental health is not part of our general health. I think that's an important distinction, because to me, I think, our whole health is our health. Like our mental health is not different than our regular health. And so I think we want to be generally healthy and generally well. And then that leads to, our overall body health, which also leads to mental health and just feeling good in your body.
Yeah. So for you personally, what are some of your kind of non-negotiable practices or routines, or things that keep your mind, as clear as you can and feeling good most days than not? I'm not naive that every day is all rainbows and butterflies, but I think we do deserve to feel good more days than not. Somehow we're the reverse of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually a pretty happy person. Usually the unhappy things are kind of external, whether it's work stuff or, somebody not being the best human or whatever it may be around.
Yeah.
Generally for me, I'm pretty happy. I think to me, it's eating healthy is a big part of it. And really at home, we cook all the time and we eat quite healthy, and we do spend our money on getting healthy produce and things like that. So that's the choice that we make. Exercising, I try to get outside and walk every single day. I mean, my job as a doctor is a good one in terms of I am moving all the time. So I think that's helpful for exercise for me. And I think, even for me, getting some sunshine, getting outside, going for a walk at lunch is a big one for my mental health, and just making sure I take a break and kind of pause as much as I can. Every single day, and also just spreading, information. I think that is also very helpful for your mental health too. Teaching, helping people is a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing it, and I really enjoy, doing stuff like this. I think it's fun, and I think if it can help some families, and that's great. And I think as a doctor, especially, there's kind of these silos that people are in right now, and I'm trying to break out of the silos and get on as many things that are outside of just the health and wellness as possible to spread the message. Because it seems like, a doctor goes on a doctor podcast or whatever, and you're speaking to the group of people that already knows what you're talking about, and it's not that helpful. Where I'm really trying to work to get on to like celebrity podcasts and influencer podcasts and podcasts where they don't talk about health that much, to reach audiences that maybe don't hear this that much, to try to get people moving in a little different direction, because I think it's really needed. And there's, like you said at the beginning, like people want to talk about this. They want to learn this. We all want our kids to be healthy, and parents are nervous. I mean, we're nervous these days. We're nervous for making the wrong decisions. We hear it all. We see it all with social media. So trying to provide some anxiety relief and trying to provide some discussion around this, I think, is helpful.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of judgment too, self-judgment and judgment, towards others as well around all of these topics. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to know, because I think if we can help just zoom out again and see this as insight or data, like these are just the facts. This is what's happening. Like you don't have to beat yourself up on, okay, yeah, we haven't been eating very well based on whatever we thought or whatever we were following, and now we're going to make a different decision. But let's not judge ourselves to the point where we can't move forward. Do you find that? Do you have any strategies or ways to help people through that?
Yeah, well, I think that is one of the biggest problems we're facing right now, is that people don't want to feel judged, or people feel like they're blaming or shaming or talking about these things, and so they go to genetics as opposed to what kind of things we have control over. So when it comes to, let's say, autism or obesity, then there's this I guess pause around talking about anything that we might have done to contribute to the issue.
Yeah,
that it exists, and that is so wrong. I think it's just so wrong. Like, it's not about blaming somebody for your child, that you caused your child's autism. It's that we're learning new stuff. And if we learn something new, then we put it into practice so that we can be healthier. If there is something that you did that contribute to it, that is what it is. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But we're here to make kids healthier and move towards a better future. And if we don't acknowledge that we're contributing to the problem, we're never going to solve it. We're never going to figure out what's causing autism. We're never going to figure out why we're getting all these chronic diseases. We're not going to pinpoint it unless we discuss it. And it's not about blame. It's just about doing something different today. When I was growing up, when a lot of us are growing up, we didn't know any of this stuff, right? We were eating fast food all the time. We were eating candy. It was like the normal thing. It wasn't anything we thought of because nobody talked about it, and it wasn't as big an issue then. But it is a big issue now. So we do need to talk about it, and we do need to make changes. But it's okay if you didn't know. Nobody's blaming you that you should have known. I'm talking about I didn't know, right? I ate McDonald's when I was little. Like I didn't know these things, right? You just did. It was just part of the deal. I went to go play hockey and like we're on the road and we went to a fast food place. Like that's what it was. I haven't been to fast food in a very long time now because I know better and I know how I feel if I eat it. So I don't do it. But that's not to blame my parents for like taking me. They didn't know. I didn't know. And it probably was not as bad back then anyways.
Yeah, of course. No, of course. It makes total sense. What's the topic that's most on your mind these days right now that you're really thinking about and, learning more about and trying to get the message out there about?
I think, let's see, what's the topic? I mean, just like parenting controversies, like the two-sided discussions on almost everything, or, division and anger on just a very large breadth of topics where it seems like anything you talk about, there's people that want to argue and fight. So I think this division and censorship has been on my mind a lot more lately. And that has really pushed me to start trying to talk about topics more, or at least talk around them as best I can without getting, kicked off the platform. So I try to be mindful still, but at least try to bring up some thoughts so people can discuss.
Okay. What's worked well because there's so much division across almost every topic in our current state of affairs, let's just say. Have you, what's worked well to actually facilitate a conversation with opposing views like that? Do you have any good best practices?
Yeah. I mean, to me, what's been really helpful is I would say education in the sense of learning about so first of all, being open-minded, right? I think that's key because you have to acknowledge both sides, right? So let's say like circumcision is a really, it's a topic that would be something that I had no idea was so divisive until I talked about it once, and people were like really upset about it. And I didn't even know it was so controversial until it happened, right? So I think that it's one, like, if you have an opinion on something, you have to be a little bit more unbiased on those things, especially if it's controversial, and talk and be open to both sides and discuss kind of both sides and the pros and the cons, and trying to be somewhere in the middle and saying like, well, here's the information that we have, and let you make your own decisions. I mean, that's how I come to a lot of decisions. That's how I talk about things in the book, because I do think it's not my job to tell you what to do as a doctor. It's my job to teach or to explain or to provide information. And I think that is the best way to handle these divisive conversations, is not to put your, dig your feet in. It's not to take one side so strongly, but to talk about both sides. And then, you can give an opinion. I think that's fine. I think opinions are good, but not to be so dogmatic on your side that you're not open to understanding the other side's perspective. So I think there's a way to be nuanced on a lot of these conversations, but it is hard on social media because everything's a small snippet. That's why I think a podcast or long form discussions is actually much better, because you can get into a discussion on some of these things, and then you can really realize that it's much more nuanced. I mean, you can talk about like somebody who says anything about like a vaccine, right? And it's like, the decision like just goes crazy. You say the word and people go nuts. And it's like, no, you need to have like a 3-hour conversation just to broach the subject and just to have any idea where somebody's mind is on the topic, right? And it's not simple. So it takes having discussions, being open to it, and kind of talking about things in a longer form. So I think that's my kind of advice, is trying to be as unbiased as you can, trying to go at things from both sides, and then letting people discuss and have debate. Like, be open to debate, be open to being wrong. If you are, then you can say it. I think it's just, we don't need to be right all the time, and we don't have to agree with everybody. Like, it's so weird to me that you can, for social media, you can follow somebody for like 5 years, and then they say one thing that you don't agree with. You're like, I can't believe you would say that. You're the worst human in the world. I'm unfollowing you. Like, you don't have to agree on everything.
Just take a pause for a second. I did want to ask you if there are any examples that come to mind where your opinion did change, like where you had a good discussion and I don't want to say that you're wrong on something, but just that I guess you had an opinion on something and it shifted to the other side after a conversation.
Yeah, one really interesting one was about crawling. After the guidelines were changed for developmental milestones, and crawling was removed as a milestone from the new guidelines. I, as a doctor, we always learn like, calling is important, but not necessarily like essential. And so I had mentioned that they took it out, and some people were really upset about it, but I kind of said I don't think it's overly essential as a milestone. So I was okay with it. But a lot of therapists were upset about that, and they were like, no. Like, let me tell you why it is essential. And so it was really interesting conversation. I spent a lot of time learning about that from them, from people's reasoning, and they had very good reasoning. And also to respect a therapist who does this, because again, this is where humility comes in. It's like, I'm a doctor, not a therapist. I know a little bit about movement, but nothing like what they know. And if they feel that it is very important, then I feel like it's very important too. And I had never considered those things, and they weren't really considered when the decisions were made. So I still don't think that you have to crawl necessarily, but I think that what really changed was, I think that it is important to mention that it is still important, and we should still work on it. So if a child goes straight from sitting to walking, I think it's still important to crawl, because there are many useful skills that are learned from crawling. So that really is what I garnered from that conversation. And I said, so I changed the post. I wrote articles on it. I've done lots of things on that topic, or a few things anyways on it, because I think it is really interesting. It's not something you think about, but if you actually talk to the experts on it, they're going to have a whole different perspective on why something is important than what you think. So yeah, I think, again, it's like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I don't know, I'm not a crawling expert, right? So I just know what I know, and I learned more, and that's great.
Yeah. I got to start to respect time and start wrapping up shortly. But one question that comes to mind is just thinking of the environment of that. I mean, your young kids are going into, mine as well, and everyone listening. Like, what tools do you want to provide to your kids as they enter into more and more of kind of the regular world and society, where they're outside of I guess mom and dad's kind of ecosystem?
Yeah, I think one of the big things are just to instill a sense of confidence, a sense of self, an understanding that they don't have to necessarily be a follower for everything, and to think for themselves, and also to be a health conscious individual who's a good person. I mean, and still, helping others, and and caring, and trying to give back to the world, more than you take. I think these are good values to instill upon them. And then, of course, there's the whole health and wellness aspect, but they're going to go into whatever they're going to go into. I don't know if it'll be health or wellness, probably not. Maybe it will be. Who knows? Too early to know. But I think it's just really imparting upon them the values that we find are important at the core, which to me are like being a good person, being happy, finding your place, and not necessarily listening to everything that you hear, not necessarily believing everything that you hear. Yeah. We've talked about, of course, a lot of things that we're working on changing, and some of the topics, obviously, that are a bit nerve-wracking given the state of where they're at and where the systems are at. But I'd love to know just which topics or which areas that you're working in are you quite excited about, in the sense of you're seeing, good positive change, and that, it's kind of lighting you up inside around, okay, we're making progress here. This is, hopefully this is a non-problem at one point. Yeah, I mean, I am very excited to see the movement in terms of holistic health and wellness, and people starting to get outside of the system and starting to become more comfortable with that, more comfortable asking questions, and more comfortable taking health into their own hands. I think COVID pushed that forward. A lot of different narratives and different, everyone has different beliefs on it. But I think at the end of the day, one thing that we definitely learned is that our health is really important, and it makes a huge difference in terms of, infections and diseases and chronic diseases, and also that we can't necessarily believe everything that we're told all the time. And so, we do have to dig deeper a little bit and look into different resources to come to something that makes sense for us and our own family. So I think that has made me very excited to see where we're going with things, and how interested people seem to be in taking health into their own hands, into their own family's hands, and being a little bit more mindful, because that to me is the way that we're going to move forward. It's not going to be companies or corporations. It's going to be people that make different decisions, and then companies and corporations will follow because they like money. And a lot of people are buying, only food that's organic. They're going to make organic food. If they're going to not buy products that have glyphosate written in it, they won't use glyphosate. Like that is the way that things will move. And the more that we move in that direction, the more that healthcare and doctors are aware of some of this stuff and maybe start to band together for health, the more that there is information out there. And I feel like the censorship was at its worst few years ago, and it's definitely moving in a better direction now. And, there's still some, but I think that more people are open to having different perspectives and debates and conversations and podcasts and things like that are really moving the needle forward. So I think the information is starting to flow, and people are seen less as crazy if they talk a little bit outside the norm. It's like it's becoming, a lot of the biggest platforms are outside of the mainstream at this point. Most of them are. So I think that's a very helpful needle mover, because these opinions can get out there and people can hear them and make some decisions on their own versus just hearing what a mainstream media site says. And you need both. I mean, I think you need both. There's a value to both, but you can't just blindly trust everything. We need to be watching each other and monitoring.
Anytime we jump into any of the extremes, I find is where it gets a bit dicey, right? And
in the middle. That's the truth. And, there's some good and bad in independent media, and there's some good and bad in mainstream media. But when everyone's just watching, CNN or something, then they have too much power. It's like you need to have both, so that way you can put things in check. Right? I think that's true, just like you said, of everything. When it's out of balance, it's no good. And that is, I think, if we're getting back to the core of the problem with our health, is we are out of balance because corporations have too much power, and there's not enough to check them, whether it comes to medications, pharmaceuticals, insurance companies that make products. They're too big, it's too complicated, and they have too much money, and they know how to play the game. And you want to fight something, like, okay, let's fight glyphosate. Okay, 15 years later, all right, you get rid of glyphosate because you've proven it finally. Okay, great. And they've make 6 other products that are worse, So it's like, it's a really tough game to try to beat a corporation. So instead you focus on your own family.
Well said. It's a beautiful bookend, I think, to wrap the conversation up with. Joel, I want to thank you for your time, for coming on, but a higher thank you for doing what you do every day. I mean, I can imagine it's not easy. You're talking about topics that can trigger some, let's just say, but you're holding true to the mission, and I think the purpose and the vision behind why you're doing all of this, which, from my understanding and what I'm getting from this conversation, is primarily to help our kids, the future of our world, essentially. So I'm incredibly grateful for you and your colleagues and the people that are helping to move these programs forward, your books, your courses, and so forth. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for everything that you're doing.